This is Esther, host of Once Upon a Crime. This month, I'm detailing stories where true crime meets paranormal activity. In this episode, I'll share a story of an alleged demonic possession of a young boy in the 1940s. While you may be skeptical of such a claim, several sources officially documented the case, including first-person eyewitnesses, making it difficult to dismiss those claims as mere superstition. You'll also hear how this case inspired a best-selling novel and blockbuster movie that helped to usher in an era of Satanic Panic, a phenomenon that would lead to accusations and criminal charges leveled against innocent people, some who were falsely convicted. If you like this video and want more true crime stories narrated by me, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to be notified each time I share a new video. Look for Once Upon a Crime True Crime on your favorite podcast app. This is Haunted Homicide, the case of the demonic possession and exorcism of Roland Doe. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Ephesians 6:12. For as long as humans have existed, we've struggled to understand the evil that men and women do. Early in the evolution of civilized society, humans tried to make sense of things they didn't understand through superstition and fantasy. A solar eclipse might be explained as a mythical creature in the heavens eating the sun. A deadly flood or a time of famine was attributed to a god who was displeased with our behavior, etc. Fear of the unknown drove most of these superstitions. For example, when people behaved outside the norms set by society, some believed they'd been bewitched by the devil. This is what sparked the Salem witch trials in 1692. More than 200 people were accused of performing witchcraft, and 30 were hanged for the crime in colonial Massachusetts. But this was before the formal disciplines of science were established. Science would replace superstition, requiring data we could analyze to understand our world and human behavior. But even as we evolve into relying on more formal knowledge, the question remains: what is the nature of evil, and how do we combat it? This question took on more significance when new forms of terror emerged in the modern era: world wars, random acts of violence, serial killers, and mass shooters, just to name a few. After World War II, we tried to shake off the horrors of war and return to the idea that humans were naturally good. Love and peace were promoted during the free love hippie era of the 1960s. But the summer of love came to a screeching halt with the news that these supposedly peace-loving hippies committed a series of brutal murders directed by cult leader Charles Manson in 1969. Then reports of atrocities against Vietnamese citizens by U.S. soldiers during the conflict in Vietnam had Americans questioning whether we were the good guys or the bad guys. Around the same time, horror film directors began producing movies where the devil was cast as the villain. In 1968, Rosemary's Baby told the story of a young pregnant woman who suspects her neighbors are part of a satanic cult and intent on using her baby as a ritual sacrifice. The Exorcist in 1973 and The Omen, released in 1976, both involve storylines of demonic possession. Modern cinematic special effects graphically depicted scenes of demon possession that shocked, horrified, and thrilled the public. Millions flocked to theaters, making these movies the most popular and profitable of that era. So it's no wonder that the idea of Satan as the architect of evil re-entered our consciousness at that time. Unfortunately, this led to people seeing the devil's hand at work at every turn, and gave rise to the phenomenon of Satanic Panic in the 1980s. Satanic Panic was a moral panic that, over several years, resulted in over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of satanic ritual abuse, physical or sexual abuse associated with the occult or satanic rituals. One of the most well-known cases of this type was the 1983 McMartin preschool trial. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office prosecuted members of the McMartin family, charging them with hundreds of acts of sexual abuse of children at their daycare center. Bizarre reports were elicited from toddlers and preschoolers, including the claim that there were secret tunnels underneath the daycare center through which children were transported and then subjected to occult sexual rituals. The McMartin trial was the most protracted and expensive criminal case in American history, lasting 7 years and at a cost of $15 million. However, no convictions were ultimately obtained. It is widely believed that the children, who were highly suggestible at that age, were improperly questioned, resulting in false memories. Adults taking part wittingly in satanic practices is one thing. But what about the idea that a person can be possessed by the devil, demons, or spirits, and are controlled by these evil entities? In 1949, a young Georgetown University student was intrigued enough by a newspaper article describing a real-life demonic possession and exorcism that the story became the inspiration for a novel. William Peter Blatty's 1971 novel, The Exorcist, tells the story of a 12-year-old girl possessed by demons. Her mother seeks out the help of 2 Catholic priests who perform a series of exorcisms to release her daughter from the control of Satan. The Exorcist became a bestseller and one of the most famous horror stories of the 20th century. In 1973, it was adapted into a movie of the same name, which won an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. Blatty's story was based in large part on the real-life case he learned about as a college student. The article published in the Washington Post detailed the case of a young boy from Maryland who was allegedly possessed by demons and underwent a series of exorcisms performed by Catholic priests. The boy was only identified under the pseudonym Roland Doe. Blatty, raised in a Catholic home, was fascinated by the idea of demonic possession. He believed that Satan was the embodiment of evil. If God were real, he theorized, then the devil must be too. Still, Blatty exaggerated some elements of the story in his novel for dramatic purposes. But the account of the demonic possession of the boy known as Roland Doe was officially documented by several sources, including the Catholic Church, hospital employees, and mental health professionals. What follows is the true story of the possession of Roland Doe. January 1949, when this story begins, was just a few years after the end of World War II, the bloodiest and most wide-ranging conflict in modern history. The end of the war revealed the brutal reality of Hitler's concentration camps and brought to our collective consciousness the atrocities humans are capable of inflicting on each other. Over 70 million people died during World War II, making it the deadliest conflict in human history. Perhaps as a response to this, spiritualism made a resurgence in popularity. Spiritualism, a centuries-old tradition, is the belief that the living can communicate with the dead through a medium. This medium can be a person who channels messages from the deceased, or a divination tool like a Ouija board. Roland Doe was the only child raised in a middle-class family in Cottage City, Maryland. In the winter of 1949, Roland was 14 years old and living with his parents and grandmother. As the only child in the home, Roland spent most of his time in the company of adults. One of his favorite adults to spend time with was his Aunt Tilly. Tilly was an interesting woman. She lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and had long been interested in spiritualism. In January, she traveled to Maryland to visit her family and spend time with her nephew Roland. On this visit, Tilly brought along a Ouija board, which she and Roland used several times to contact relatives and loved ones who had passed away. Tilly had previously introduced her nephew to spiritualism, and he, like her, was fascinated by the subject. Soon after Tilly returned to St. Louis, Roland and his grandmother began hearing what sounded like water dripping down the walls and onto the floor of their home. However, they couldn't find the source, and nothing appeared to be wet. Later that evening, After his parents returned home, they heard more strange sounds. Now all four of them heard scratching coming from inside the walls. They assumed they had an infestation of rats and called an exterminator, but he could find no evidence of rodent activity. The noises stopped, and the family went back to normal. 10 days later, the family learned that Aunt Tilly, who'd returned to St. Louis, had died. She was only 54 and left behind a husband and a son. Shortly thereafter, more strange activity occurred in Roland's home. The scratching noises and the sounds of running water returned. But in addition to that, what sounded like loud marching could be heard coming from Roland's room. The family believed in the afterlife and now became convinced they were experiencing paranormal activity. Because her sister Tilly had just passed, Roland's mother called out, "Tilly, if that's you, knock 3 times." 3 knocks were heard coming from the floor. She then asked the spirit to knock 4 times. 4 knocks were heard. After that, paranormal activity continued nonstop, according to Roland's family. Clawing sounds came from Roland's mattress. Knocks and other scratching noises were heard on the floors and the walls at all hours of the day and night. Objects began to move of their own volition. Furniture skidded across the floor, mattresses shook and bounced up and down. Most of the activity was centered in Roland's room and increased after he went to bed. His bed would shake so violently, Roland was woken up several times each night. Roland's family were church-going Lutherans. His mother attempted to calm the strange activity through prayer, lighting candles, and sprinkling holy water, but this only worsened things. Items would fly across the room, extinguishing the candles, and the glass bottles containing holy water would fly off their shelves but never break. Then the possession of Roland Doe began. Strange guttural sounds came from deep in his chest, and he spoke unintelligible words in a voice not his own. He experienced convulsions and reacted violently to something no one else could see. He'd kick and scream and thrash around, sometimes hurting himself in the process. Roland experienced these events even while at school. Years later, a classmate recalled that Roland was sitting at a desk, the type with the chair attached, when the desk started, quote, shaking and vibrating very fast. I remember the teacher yelling at him to stop, and he yelled back, "I'm not doing it," end quote. After almost a month of trying to deal with whatever was happening to their son on their own, Roland's parents sought outside help. They took him to their family physician, a psychiatrist, and a child psychologist. He was tested for several conditions, including epilepsy, schizophrenia, and hyperactivity, but all were ruled out as the cause of his behavior. Next, they met with a clergyman from their church, Lutheran minister Reverend Luther Schultze. Schultze was interested in the paranormal and agreed to try and help. He arranged to have Roland spend the night in his home to observe him, since most of the activity seemed to occur after midnight. The first night, the Reverend was amazed at what he observed. The bed Roland was sleeping in began to vibrate. Scratching sounds came from the walls. Blankets were flung from his body and across the room by an invisible hand. A heavy armchair tipped over with no one near it. Scratches also began appearing on Roland's body. Schultze believed that he was witnessing a true demonic possession. He knew he didn't have the expertise to help them and advised Roland's parents to seek help from a Catholic priest. The Catholics know about this kind of thing, he told them. The family consulted with a local priest, Father Edward Albert Hughes. Hughes gave the family holy water and blessed candles and told them what prayers to say to clear their home. They returned home with the items and followed the priest's instructions. Lighting the candles and bringing the blessed water into Roland's room seemed to anger whatever entity was responsible for the paranormal activity. The candle's flame shot up several feet, leaving burn marks on the ceiling. The holy water vial was thrown off the table and smashed into hundreds of pieces. The family returned to the priest and reported what happened. Father Hughes contacted the archbishop and requested permission to conduct an exorcism. Simply stated, an exorcism is a specific form of prayer that the Catholic Church uses against the devil's power, according to the official statement from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. It is not a rite that is frequently performed, and special conditions must be met and permission granted by a church leader before it's approved. After the Archbishop reviewed the case, he permitted Father Hughes to perform an exorcism on Roland. On February 27th, Roland was admitted to Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C. Georgetown University is the oldest Catholic institution of higher learning in the United States. It is a private Jesuit research university. Precautions were taken to ensure Roland could not injure himself and that the priests would also be protected while the exorcism was performed. Because a formal exorcism had been granted, it can be assumed at this point that everyone was in agreement that Roland was suffering from demonic possession. Roland was strapped to the hospital bed, and Father Hughes began reciting the prayer of exorcism over the boy. In an act of superhuman strength, Roland suddenly broke free of his restraints, pulled a metal bed spring from the bed frame, and lunged towards the priest. He slashed him with the metal spring, leaving a deep gash down Father Hughes's arm from his shoulder to his wrist. Over 100 stitches were required to close the wound. Roland was discharged from the hospital the next day and returned home. The boy's behavior escalated over the next few days. He spoke in other languages that he had no knowledge of, exhibited superhuman strength when he was in the power of the devil, and more scratches appeared on his body that spelled out words like hell. His family was unsure how to help their son. Then another word appeared scratched into Roland's chest: Louis. They took this as a sign that they should take him to St. Louis, Missouri. Roland's mother grew up in St. Louis and had family there. St. Louis was also where Tilly lived before her death. On March 3rd, Roland and his mother traveled to St. Louis and moved in with relatives who were devout Catholics. Roland's mother thought that perhaps in this new place, things would calm down. But the activity increased soon after arriving there. On the first night, Roland had an episode shrieking and contorting his body in an inhuman way. His relatives were terrified. Roland's cousin was attending St. Louis University. Her professors were Jesuit priests. She approached Father Raymond Bishop, one of her teachers, and asked for help. Father Bishop consulted with another priest, Father William Bodern, pastor of the university's church, St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church. Together, they evaluated Roland and decided that a major exorcism was required. Major exorcisms differ from simple or minor forms of the ritual that can be performed by any Catholic priest or layperson. Major exorcisms are rites that can only be performed by a bishop or priest with the express permission of a church leader. It is used for, quote, the expulsion of demons or to the liberation of a person from demonic possession, according to the Code of Canon Law, as written in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. On March 11, 1949, Father Bishop and Father Bodern began the rite of a simple exorcism on Roland Doe. They blessed him with a holy relic, placed a crucifix under his pillow, recited the prayers, and left without incident. The activity began in Roland's room within minutes of the priest's departure. Furniture shook violently, a bookcase was tipped over, and Roland thrashed about in agony of some invisible force. On March 16th, with the written permission of local Archbishop Joseph Ritter, Father Bodern returned to perform a major exorcism on Roland. Father Bishop and Father Walter Halloran accompanied him. Halloran, a young priest, had been enlisted to help restrain young Roland if need be. Father Bishop kept a detailed journal of the exorcism. The ritual included blessing Roland with holy water, reciting the exorcism prayers, tracing crosses over the boy, and using sacred or blessed objects. As soon as the ritual began, Roland began to shriek and contort. A deep demonic voice came from him that sounded nothing like his own voice. He cursed at the priests, using foul language. His behavior alternated between violently thrashing about and falling into a trance with guttural sounds emanating from his chest. Objects began to fly around the room, and some were thrown at the priests. Roland reacted violently whenever he was presented with a sacred object. The ritual continued over several nights, beginning after dark and ending before dawn. Toward daybreak, Roland would lapse into a deep sleep. and the next day did not recall anything that had happened the night before. Some nights, bleeding scratches emerged on Roland's skin. A pitchfork-shaped pattern of red lines formed along Roland's thigh and down to his ankle. After 4 nights, Roland's shouting and cursing at the priests became almost unbearable. Then he stood up and urinated on his bed and the priests. Roland was admitted to Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis the next day. Hospital records recorded the symptoms attendants observed of Roland's possession. Because his symptoms seemed to be getting worse, Father Bowdern arranged for Roland and his father to stay in the college church rectory to continue the exorcisms. The priest hoped that the more Roland was exposed to the church environment, the quicker he might be saved from the devil's grasp. This proved to be a mistake. Father Halloran attempted to restrain an ever more violent Roland during the rite, but the boy was too strong. He succeeded in striking the priest in the face, breaking his nose. Roland was returned to the hospital, and the exorcisms continued. Records kept by the priest's daily journal, as well as the hospital records, outlined the following. Roland contorting his body in unnatural ways, Roland speaking in ancient languages, Roland reacting violently to sacred objects, Roland shouting curses, insults, and blasphemous phrases, and Roland levitating several inches to a foot over his hospital bed. The priests had one last weapon they hoped would finally release Roland from Satan. They asked the boy if he'd be willing to convert to Catholicism, be baptized, and receive communion. Roland agreed, willing to try anything. On April 1st, Roland was baptized at the college's church rectory. The following day, he received the sacrament of First Holy Communion. This is an important Catholic sacrament, the first after baptism. It usually occurs when a child between the ages of 7 and 12 receives the Eucharist for the first time, a ceremony commemorating the Last Supper, in which bread and wine are consecrated and consumed. The extended exorcism sessions continued through the first 2 weeks of April. Although it seemed that Roland would never be free from the demon or demons that possessed him, the priests did not give up. April 17th was Easter Sunday, and all was quiet on that day. For once, Roland had a break from the ordeal he'd been experiencing for almost 3 months. On Monday, April 18th, known as Holy Monday to Catholics, Father Bowdern, performing the nightly exorcism, forced Roland to hold a crucifix. Suddenly, the boy's demeanor calmed. His normal 13-year-old voice returned, and he asked the priest several questions about the Latin prayers he'd been reciting. The demon's last gasp came when the priest commanded him to say his name. Roland reacted violently for several minutes, but a voice emerged from him, identifying himself by name and admitting he was one of God's fallen angels. The name remains a mystery to this day. At 11 p.m., a different voice emerged from the boy, identifying himself as Saint Michael, God's warrior angel who sits at his right hand. He then cried out in a firm voice, "Satan, I am Saint Michael. I command you, Satan, and all your demons, to leave this body immediately." Immediately after this statement, Roland fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The possession of Roland Doe ended. From that day forward, Roland experienced no further incidents of possession. The priest's detailed diary of the exorcisms was filed away in the church's records. The case would have faded into obscurity if a Georgetown University student hadn't read a newspaper article that inspired his novel, The Exorcist, 2 decades later. It wasn't until 2021 that Roland Doe's real identity was revealed. He was Ronald Edwin Hunkler, the son of Edwin and Odell Hunkler from Cottage City, Maryland. Hunkler married and had 3 children. He had a 40-year career as an engineer at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. In the 1960s, his work contributed to the Apollo space mission. Hunkler retired in 2001 and died in 2020 at the age of 85. His daughter was interviewed after his death and reported that her father long feared he would be exposed as Roland Doe. He dreaded the thought that his colleagues would learn that his story inspired The Exorcist. She told the reporter, quote, "On Halloween, we always left the house because he thought someone would figure out who he was and come to his home. He feared he'd never find peace again if that happened. He worried terribly about being discovered." End quote. Upon its release, The Exorcist became a phenomenon. Some people were so frightened by the scenes of young Reagan's demon possession that they passed out, vomited, or ran from the theater. In some cities, movie theaters hired medical personnel to be on hand to render aid. This may have been a publicity stunt, but plenty of real-life danger was associated with the movie. So many strange events occurred during the filming and production of The Exorcist that some believe it's cursed. Linda Blair, who played young Reagan, and Ellen Burstyn, who played her mother, were both injured during filming. In one scene where Reagan levitates, her harness malfunctioned, causing her to be forcefully thrown onto the bed, injuring her spine. Burstyn also sustained a back injury when she was yanked roughly back in a harness. In the scene where she is slung across the room, she screams in real pain. This was left in the film. A mysterious fire broke out on the set, which set the production schedule back and added significantly to the cost of the movie. Only the interior sets were burned, but Reagan's room, the primary location of the exorcism scenes, was left untouched. Several people associated with the movie died while the film was in production. Jack McGowan, the actor who played Burke Dennings, died from influenza shortly after filming wrapped up. He was 54. The actress who played Father Karras's mother also died during production. She was 89, and eerily, the woman she plays also dies, an important plot point in the movie. Linda Blair's grandfather, and actor Max von Sydow's brother, also died before the movie wrapped, as did the infant of an assistant camera person and a night watchman on the set. With so many serious accidents and deaths associated with the set, director William Friedkin became concerned enough to invite a priest to perform a blessing. Some joked that he should perform an exorcism, but he declined. The blessing seemed to help calm the eerie atmosphere and reduce the anxiety of the actors and crew. While there wasn't technically a homicide in this story, there is one murder associated with The Exorcist. I covered that case in Season 6, Episode 248 of Once Upon a Crime. The episode, titled Final Curtain Call, Paul Bateson and The Exorcist, details the murder of Addison Verrill. Verrill was murdered by Paul Bateson, a former radiology technician who had a brief scene in The Exorcist. Bateson plays himself. He is the hospital technician who appears in the scene where Reagan is undergoing tests to diagnose her symptoms. You can listen to that episode by clicking the link in the show notes. Final thoughts. Do we accept evil deeds like serial killers, mass shooters, child predators, and random acts of violence as an unfortunate but inevitable fact of human nature? Do we also accept that humans, due to various conditions, including their environment, temperament, and psychological makeup, are capable of both good and bad deeds? If so, then we must conclude it is a choice, whether we succumb to our more primitive urges or, as the saying goes, appeal to our better angels. Tell me your thoughts by interacting with me on our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. There are links in the show notes, or go to our website, truecrimepodcast.com, and click on the social media logos at the top of the homepage. I shared another true account of demonic possession in my Halloween special episode on Patreon. Check out the Once Upon a Crime Halloween Party video episode by becoming a member at patreon.com/onceupon-a-crime. You'll get an extra episode of the podcast each month by becoming a patron of the show. You'll also get special videos and every episode ad-free. Join us. We'd love to have you. Once Upon a Crime is written and produced by me, Esther Sanchez Ludlow. My executive producer is Lorena Garcia, and my researcher is Emma Battaglia. To watch videos of each of our episodes, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll find it under Once Upon a Crime Podcast. There's a link in the show notes. Until next time, be good to one another.